Good morning. I want to welcome everyone participating in today's webinar, Strategies for Nonprofit Fundraising During a Global Crisis. My name is Trevor Williams, and I'm an audit partner at GRF CPAs Advisors, formerly Gelman, Rosenberg, and Friedman, and I will be today's moderator. I'd like to start off today with some quick housekeeping items and explain what you will need to earn CPE credit. Participants seeking CPE credit today must complete and submit a short evaluation survey that will appear automatically immediately following the webinar. You will be asked to recall these words in order to receive credit. Please write down the CPE words when they are given and keep them until you receive your certificate. They will not be provided again. If you have any technical questions or issues during the webinar, please use the questions function to speak with our webinar administrator for assistance. The slide deck and recording from today's webinar will be available for download at the link shown here. You will also receive a follow-up email with direct links. Technical support and CPE questions may be addressed to Nathan McElveen at nmceen@grfcpa.com. Today's learning objective is to help participants develop fundraising strategies that address the economic crisis with data, tactics, and best practices. 1 CPE credit is available for this webinar. I would like to introduce your presenter for today's webinar. Heidi Geider is a senior consultant with the Rainmakers Group, as well as the Senior Director of Development at Young Invincibles in Washington, D.C. She has worked in all areas of resource development and nonprofit management since 1996. I will now turn the presentation over to Heidi.
Thank you, Trevor. Good morning. Thanks everyone for joining us today. I really appreciate it. And I'm really looking forward to the conversation and exchange that we can have about this moment. It's certainly incredibly critical, and I appreciate everyone taking time out of their very busy days to learn with us today. So I wanted to start off with what our agenda is going to be, and just to note that the information that I'll be providing will be primarily focused on information that has happened since March 9th. That's one of the points of reference that many of us are using to develop the activities and navigate how we're proceeding. So we're going to open with an understanding of the moment, proceed to talking about plans and resources, and then end with a looking ahead and providing information about what we can do as this moment transitions. So starting off with the landscape analysis, this is really important because this time is changing rapidly, and it's unlike any other event that any of us have experienced. It's also unique in that it's a professional responsibility moment that's compounded by personal impact. We are all being affected by this moment, so it's really helpful to understand what's happening so we can be at our best and determine how we can proceed.
We have now come to our first polling question. Since March 2020, categorize your organization's fundraising goals. A, we will not achieve our fundraising goals. B, we will achieve or have already achieved our fundraising goals. C, we will have to change or changed our fundraising goals to meet increased need. Or D, we will have to change or change our fundraising goals, adjusting for decreased revenue projections. Please take a moment now to answer. While participants are submitting their answers, I'll provide the first CPE word. The first CPE word is fund. If you want to receive CPE credit, please jot this word down because you will need it again for the survey following the webinar. Again, the first CPE word is fund, F-U-N-D. Well, Heidi, it looks the majority of the respondents have selected option D. We will have to change or change our fundraising goals adjusted for decreased revenue.
Yeah, I would say that this is not surprising, though it is, of course, of great concern for all of us that we've had to change our goals in light of decreased revenue. I'm also interested in the data point around changing goals or not achieving those goals. One thing that I'd like to share is that I would applaud every organization for taking the time for reviewing their goals and having conversations about changing them. I think it's really important to do that. And I think that you are a best steward of your funds when you do that. Throughout this conversation, I want to impress upon everyone that it's important to bring in as many experts on these matters as possible. And your finance team, including your accountants, is a really critical part of that because they're able to not only share the information that they have from your organization, but what they're seeing in the landscape and can help advise on projections and goals based on a larger landscape of organizations. So we'll keep all of these poll results in mind as I share information throughout the presentation. So in terms of understanding the moment, we want to understand what are some things we know, what are some things that are definite, and understanding these is very helpful to us because it will help us navigate the moments going forward. So we know that all of us in the nonprofit world are experiencing significant changes, and one of them is a demand for service. This is particularly true, of course, for healthcare organizations, people working with older people, and we also are seeing an evolving demand in services, whether that's related to education or technology, job loss, job training. There's a number of different sectors that are really being called upon in ways they've never had to before. As the poll results shared, nonprofits are experiencing reductions in revenue. Donors who normally would give might be pulling back. There might be revenue loss due to events. And of course, the economic upheaval is causing individuals and foundations to rethink their giving. And of course, the day-to-day internal struggles. People are struggling with staff and volunteer availability. While some parts of the country may be opening up, there are others that remain on stay-at-home or shelter-in-place orders. There's understandable anxiety about interactions, and it's really changed how we do business. So these are things that are important to acknowledge and consider as we make our decisions and create strategy. In terms of the philanthropic space specifically, a number of foundations, this list began as over 300, grew to over 500. It's now past 700. And this was fairly immediate. This happened fairly quickly where foundations wrote a letter pledging that they would ease grant restrictions. And that includes providing general operating support, reducing requirements such as site visits or written reports, and providing their grantees with enormous flexibility around deadlines. I want to stay on this for a moment because for those of us who've done this work for quite some time, I hope we all recognize how groundbreaking this is. It's an aspect of foundation giving that many people have called for, and we are astounded that it's happening. It's really important also because we want to make sure that we're coordinating with our internal teams. While it's wonderful that they're transitioning to general operating support, that's a significant change in how you track your revenue and how you account for your revenue. So we want to make sure that everyone on staff has accurate information, that it's recorded, and that it's memorialized in writing. That could be a revised agreement that requires a signature or an acknowledgement from an executive director or president. It may manifest in the form of an email. Keep your auditors, your accountants, any of your operations staff or consultants close to you and make sure that you are accounting for all of these changes. If you need any clarity, it's a great time to ask questions, especially now when a number of people are available to respond. The other thing that's happened, and this is very new, this actually just happened in the last few days, is over 300 foundations have signed a letter to Congress asking them to change the law regarding the legal requirement around assets and shifting that from 5% and increasing it to 10%. Again, this is groundbreaking. This is something that a number of individuals in the philanthropic space have called for and have encouraged. And to have foundations themselves go to the legislators across the country and to say, this is something we want to mandate, it also will help us going forward, knowing that the foundations will have that capacity to donate assets. The other areas of giving that we see changes in are donor-advised funds. Donor-advised funds are reporting enormous activity, again, unprecedented from them. This data is from about mid-March, and we're continuing to see a number of investments made through donor-advised funds. That 120 million number is increasing, I would say, daily. So ensuring that any contact information you have is accurate, including your IRS information. That's usually where donor-advised fund staff derive information. And many of you probably participated in the Giving Tuesday Now event. This took place on May 5th, and it's an outgrowth from the event that takes place in November, usually right after Thanksgiving. And the organization that designs this decided this is a critical moment, and we want to create another opportunity for people to give. Early indicators show that Giving Tuesday Now resulted in about 70% of the giving that they give at Thanksgiving. That's enormous because it demonstrates that people are able to give, they're interested in giving, and certainly having gone from November to May, that's about a little more than 6 months, that people are still prepared to support organizations. And then lastly, but still important, is as part of the relief packages, one of the changes that was made was a charitable deduction shift going from $250 to $300. These are all tools that you can use to ensure that you're communicating with your funders and you're aware of the space and the opportunities that you have.
Heidi, if I could just interject for really briefly, I really like this particular slide. A couple things that jump out to me on this slide, as well as what you just mentioned. First and foremost is how the people have come together to, in such a crisis, to be able to help organizations and believe in missions that they truly believe in. I think that's great, and it's a testament to the people out there. Secondly, that 700 foundations pledged. Is there a listing or somewhere that the respondents or recipients on this particular webinar can go to find this information? What foundations are providing this information and these funds?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. Thanks, Trevor. Yes, there is a resource. There may be multiple, but the resource that I depend on, and there's a resource list at the end of the webinar that we'll share with everyone, but it's the Chronicle of Philanthropy, which is available online. The Chronicle of Philanthropy has announced that they're going to provide a number of their resources and articles at no cost and no registration for the public during COVID. They have the most current list of which foundations have signed on to this pledge. You can also visit their website to find out which of the 300 foundations signed on to the letter to Congress. They're a really reliable resource, and their information tends to be on the pulse of every aspect of philanthropy that's happening. And it's, again, for everyone, it's the Chronicle of Philanthropy, and it's available through their website and also through other social media platforms. Great question, though.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Thanks. So we want to talk a little bit about understanding fundraising crisis as an opportunity. This is a moment where we should and can engage our donors. So we want to talk about the things that we know, looking at past events. So whether we're thinking about the dot-com bust, the United Way scandals, the recession of 2008, there's been a number of moments in our history that we've gone through, and we can learn from those moments. And there is data and information about these as well as anecdotal information. But it's a really critical time to understand donors, their experience of this moment, and how we might navigate this time will impact future efforts. So what do we know? Well, this is really important. What we know is organizations that stayed around after disruptive events, focused on their mission, stayed connected with their donors, and they did push fundraising. Again, I'm going to stay on this point for a moment, and the reason is because it feels counterintuitive. It feels as if asking for money during a time of economic crisis might be seen as tone deaf. And the importance is what you want to do is engage them about the work you're doing and have them understand that their support is very necessary in this time and how much you appreciate it. What we know about organizations that did not thrive during a crisis and were often shuttered afterwards is that they lacked engagement. They didn't communicate with their donors. And so customizing your communications is incredibly important right now because the field is so crowded. So again, if you walk away with anything from today, it's continue to communicate with your supporters, stay on your mission, and continue to ask and engage them and express why their support is still needed right now. So let's talk about the people that support us, our donors. How are they experiencing this? What's happening in their lives? And how does understanding that help us navigate how we might fundraise with them? So people are looking for opportunities to engage. A number of us have shifted from going to work or volunteer or church, and now we're at home. We're home a lot. So they're looking for things to do to engage with one another. So anytime you can create an engagement opportunity to connect with them, it's really important to them. There's enormous value, and this is probably something that you didn't see as a value add for your donors in the past, but this is something you can provide now and help them through this. But we're shifting those experiences. We used to have events. You may have volunteered at a food bank or a diaper bank. You may have joined a number of other volunteers to be chaperones or to work at a performance event. Those things have changed because they're not happening. So their lives have changed and the spaces where they're meeting have evolved. So being cognizant of that, but creating experiences for them that are just as valuable. And then again, going back to the personal experience of this moment, everyone is being touched by this and it's different for everybody. We want to make sure as fundraisers, as board members, as volunteers that really care about these organizations that we're working with, that we listen and that we demonstrate empathy and compassion. This is something that I find don't always feel like I should have to remind people, but I think approaching spaces with grace always benefits us in the long term, especially at this time. We have seen a lot of increased engagement and a lot of people asking for support in this time. So for example, people are using tools like GoFundMe to support basic needs and make sure that they have what they need. So there's a lot of need out there on a personal level as well. So let's be cognizant of that. So understanding how your communications are and can be critical in this time is important as well. What should we be telling them and what is appropriate in this moment? So I want to go through some of the things that we should be sharing. And this is a baseline, certainly customize everything to your donors and your mission. So we want to always tell them what we're doing. What are our programs? Was there a tutoring program that's still happening, but it's moved to online? Was there any other food banks or something where you're still allowing volunteers to come, but there's some guidance? So what are you still doing? And maybe also what have you stopped doing and why? It's important to share with your supporters as to what's happening in the moment. We also want to provide basic information. Again, some things are opening up, but we want people to know what the rules might be, what the guidance might be, how to reach your staff and be in touch. Be transparent about the resources you're using for guidance. This helps people understand why you're making the decisions you're making. I know a number of organizations are using the Centers for Disease Control. Others might be using guidance from their state's health department, but be transparent in your communications about that. Of course, we want to know how we can make a secure gift. If people can still mail you a check, how can they do that safely? If it's via credit card, what are the resources for that? And what are the terms for giving? And if they have a question, is there someone they can call to talk to or send an email to and make sure that they're responsive? In terms of outreach, we want to make sure that donors can reach anybody at your organization. I've noticed increasingly people have shifted their signature files to say, we're working remotely, but here's how you can reach us, or we're closed, but we're still working. It's really important that they know how to communicate with you, and they know how to reach you. This is especially true for media or any of your communication staff. But overall, I would say make sure the message that you're sending is your organization is primarily concerned with the health and well-being of your staff and your volunteers. One other thing I want to share here in this moment is, the finance and development departments of any organization have an enormous duty of care. They have to make sure that they're in alignment with any regulations and guidelines and are really implementing the best practices and have a duty of care. So it really is the onus is on us to make sure that all these systems and communications tools are accurate, because it's what we're held accountable towards going forward.
We have now come to our second polling question. As a result of COVID-19, have you or will you have to cancel a revenue generating event? A, yes, B, no, or C, unsure at this time. Please take a moment now to answer. While participants are submitting their answers, I'll provide the second CPE word. The second CPE word is operations. If you want to receive CPE credit, please jot this word down because you will need it for the survey following the webinar. Again, the second CPE word is operations. OPERATIONS. Well, Heidi, not surprising. It looks as though the majority of the respondents have responded with A, yes.
Yeah, this is, as you said, is not surprising. What we want to do in this time is to help you navigate and provide valuable tips as to how to communicate with your donors and support the fact that you've had to cancel, and it might even be multiple events or a series of events, and that revenue may constitute a large number of resources that your organization has. This has probably been among the most unsettling components of fundraising. I mean, it's been part of fundraising models for generations. And so thinking through how do we create strategies to help us minimize the damage these events have happened is really important. So thanks everyone for voting on that. So we're going to focus now actually on events, and we want to really focus in on that because, again, making sure that your donors know what is happening when it comes to events is really important. So if an event had to be canceled or rescheduling, communicating with your donors is really important, and making sure that your top donors and people that tend to come to your event, even if they're not donors, know what's happening. You want to really establish with them that their support is still valued and, of course, still needed. I'll use an example from my own experience. I was planning to attend an event in April, and the organization, of course, canceled, and they wrote that they would be returning all contributions. I believe this was on an individual level. And I was able, to respond and to say that I have the capacity in the moment to make my gift a donation, and I hope they can put it to good use. They were very gracious about it. But, I think that may not be true for all of us, but establishing that their support is still valued is really a message that can translate into future giving. Thinking about your transitions from an event in person to an event virtually. I think by now, including this, we've experienced a number of different events virtually, so we've tested platforms and we see what works and what doesn't. But really be thoughtful. You may want to revamp your entire event. Break it down into parts, maybe have multiple night events, maybe have specific topics, bring people together in breakout rooms, but focusing on the opportunity to more deeply engage with individuals should really be your goal if you're switching to a virtual event. So again, the mantra here is smaller groups, more focused interaction. If you've seen the most successful events, they really are the ones where people have those opportunities to interact. It's not as focused anymore on keynote speakers or other aspects of events that we've had in the past. If you're planning an event in the future and you're still thinking about what to do and how to do it, this could include events up through 2022, even beyond in terms of what I'm hearing. Thinking about whether or not you want to transition to a virtual platform, talk to your donors. This is very important about whether or not you can keep their gift. And you want to make sure that any revenue that you would have received from the event does cover the costs of software or security and increasing the program demand. One positive is individuals that wouldn't otherwise be able to attend an in-person event can now attend a virtual event. So you actually may end up with more people, but you want to make sure that that experience for them is similar to the one for a smaller group.
Heidi, if I could interject right here, one thing, and I think you mentioned it early in one of the earlier slides, is again, from an auditing perspective, supporting documentation is very key here. And I suggest to everyone that's on this webinar to take this very seriously and do what they can to obtain supporting documentations from its various donors and sponsors to represent and have as supporting documentary evidence that that particular donor is allowing you to keep that gift.
Yeah,
and the purpose of it, sorry about that.
No, go ahead, please.
And to stipulate whether or not it's restricted or for general operating.
Absolutely. As we've said throughout this, your finance and development teams have to be hand in hand in these matters. It has to be recorded in writing. And it will help your donors. 3 months from now, I know we're all completely stressed thin, so we might forget that we agreed to that. It might have changed. Having proper record keeping will ensure not only that you have accurate information, but it'll help the process going forward. These things are going to continue to shift. One thing that I try to do is I affirm anything a donor shares with me over the phone or in an email, and I repeat back. So I could send an email saying, "It's great to talk with you, Trevor, this morning. Thank you so much for allowing us to turn your gala donation into a general operating donation. We really appreciate that. We'll make sure that we send an updated tax deduction letter." That gives Trevor the opportunity to respond and say, "Actually, no, I didn't want to do that. I encourage others to do it, but I can't." Or, "Yes, I agree." Similarly, going back to the grant agreement, if there's been a change, we want to record that and make sure that there's proper documentation, because otherwise it'll become complicated, not only for accounting, but certainly it'll culminate in your auditing practices. We know events, both revenue and expenses, are tracked separately on our audits and our 990. So if there's revenue loss, if there's revenue gain for those, we need to track those very, very carefully.
Absolutely.
The other thing I would say on that is anything to do with events in terms of your vendors. Did you have a contract? Did it have to be terminated? That's another aspect of these. Again, we're talking about fundraising, but part of our work is ensuring our expenses are in order. So any changes that you might have as a result of terminations or default, again, please talk with your teams. This might also be an area where your board members could help to ensure that any contractual obligations the organization has are abided by. So how do we talk to our donors about this? What are some things we can do in the moment? So I'm going to go through a set of suggestions and recommendations. I want to start off at the top with my suggestions for all organizations. These are strategies that, regardless of your mission, what your programs look like, that you can all aim to use. And overall, the theme is people are looking for connections. Again, they're looking for engagements, for opportunities. So think about customizing and personalizing your communications. They need not be long, they just need to be authentic. And always thank your donors. Even if they haven't given, it's really important to thank people and to appreciate them in this moment. It's something that prospective donors and current donors later on will look to and remember that you appreciated their support and their engagement at this time. Thinking about varying the messenger. So we are getting a lot of information, whether it's via our social media platforms, email, certainly an increased use of phone calls. And by varying the messenger, it allows the viewer or the participant to hear from someone different. So you may want to showcase one of your programs or a staff member. You could share a photo. I've seen a lot of photos of Zoom events, and they've narrated what went on. You could also host a town hall or a video gathering that just shares information about your programming. And it need not always be led by an executive director. It could be any one of your team members or even a volunteer or board member. Thinking through what the needs of your organization are, how has your work changed? I always share this example from the organization that I work with that focuses on young adults. Young adults, as many of you know and are probably experiencing maybe even in your own families, had a real upheaval. Colleges closed, the dormitories had students leave campuses, they switched to online learning. There were a lot of things happening very rapidly across the country. So for a group that works with college-age students, it was a real shift for us to see how we could serve their needs. So we aim to narrate that for our supporters. So the biggest hit in terms of a non-financial source that we often work with is our volunteer programs. Again, because of the shelter-in-place or stay-at-home orders, people were not permitted to move around and to engage in the way we normally do. So one idea is to have a thankathon. Ask your volunteers to contact other supporters or prospective supporters and thank them for their gifts and their engagement over time. This is a non-monetary way to acknowledge people's support and engagement with your organization. So in our next slide, we want to focus on the rapid response organizations, or as I call them, the frontline organizations. These are your healthcare centers, your hospitals, nursing homes. These are a number of different agencies and organizations that have been profoundly affected by this healthcare crisis. So the first thing to know about your organization, and wanted to say an extra thanks to anyone attending, because I know how precious your time is and how valuable it is. So to take the time to do this, just very, very grateful for that. You are a trusted resource. There's a lot of information. There's a lot of conflicting information. So people who give to your organization or support them are looking to you for information that they can trust. So that's really important, making sure that anything that you put out there, whether it's regarding best practices or what you're seeing, or again, data perhaps, be really thoughtful and mindful about that. Certainly if there's any missteps, communicate that as quickly as possible. We want to also be able to share what's happening. Again, very sensitive to the fact that this is incredibly personal and incredibly traumatic for many of us. But if you're able to, sharing the moment, share some of the victories and some of the progress that people have had, and how you've been able to serve your community. This is really important to us because we want to show these are vital services and they're happening in the moment. I want to also talk about how it evolves. I think each of us wakes up each day and there's a new piece of information or a change or a data point. So we want to talk about that. These organizations are among the ones that are probably communicating more frequently and should probably double down on social media platforms where you're able to get out information quickly. But again, ensure that it's accurate before it goes out. Thinking about your ongoing needs, I think one of the challenges that rapid response organizations are facing is that their day-to-day work has accelerated and changed in such a way that the work that they had been doing before COVID may often be underserved. So remind your supporters of that. It's really important thinking long-term. As we say, the basics aren't forgotten. And again, focusing on positivity. What was something that you did or got? An example that I heard about recently was someone I know works at a clinic, and they got a donation of some N95 masks, completely unexpected, and sent a thank you note to the funder, but also shared that story with their board and some of their supporters. So it was just a nice gesture. They were found and certainly not needed by the users. And again, thank them. If you got a specific gift or if you got any type of donation during this time, it's really important to highlight those, and you can do that pretty easily. So next I want to talk about what I refer to as intermediary organizations. Intermediary organizations are similar to the ones that I work for. I'm going to pause for a moment for some water, just a moment. Sorry about that. Stay hydrated. That's an important point. So I wanted to talk about intermediary groups. So these are groups where your services might not be part of rapid response, but you're affected by it. The example that I always use is the organization that I work for, Young Invincibles. And the reason I do that is because our lives have changed. We work in the healthcare space, making sure that people have enrollment for healthcare, but we don't provide healthcare services ourselves. But what we found is people have a lot of questions, as you can imagine, about healthcare enrollment, and we need to be there to provide them with those answers. So these are tips for groups that, again, are not directly affected, but certainly need to be responding in a very specific and unique way in this time. So again, we want to affirm the need for our services and how we're connecting it to what's happening. And a key way to do that is through storytelling, sharing the experiences and narrating how your organization has been impacted. We've done this by actually asking students to tell their stories, what happened when they left campus, how have their lives have changed. And it's been really telling because people now understand how we've been able to work with them. So we want the people to share their experiences in an authentic way, and we want to focus on any inequities. So right now, if people can't get healthcare coverage, especially now, that could create a lot of harm. So talking about that in a way that talks about systemic change is really vital to the conversation. So again, we have here thanking your staff and volunteers to both the public and to each other is important. Our staffs in this moment are completely exhausted, and we're really focused on how much we're doing each day and shifting priorities. But a public acknowledgement of your staff and volunteers can be a way that you can acknowledge them at the same time lifting that up for your donors, that you're supporting them. Okay, and again, I want to go over to some of the tactics that we have about engaging our supporters. So the key is for your web pages, make sure your donate page is not only up to date, but has enough information for people that they know what are the different ways they can give and engage. So the more options, the better. Donors are really concerned right now. So if you can give them information in real time, it helps them out, and it also helps you out to make sure they know where to get information. So your urgent needs, do you need masks? Do you need equipment? Your donor advised funds. This is a way for individual donors to give through a third party. They can make a stock gift. The Amazon Smile program, I think every one of us is actually using Amazon constantly. So this is a great way to make sure that your charity also benefits from that. And our corporate partnerships, there are a number of corporations that are looking for especially publicly facing opportunities to demonstrate how they're helping the nonprofit sector. And again, just use an example below for one of the animal welfare charities. And I just thought their site was great. Kudos to a colleague in the development space who highlighted this one for me, and I just love it. You know, donate, volunteer, foster, right there. Very easy. You click on any of those, and you're able to go and get immediate information about what they're doing in that time. Okay, so how should we customize our messages? Again, we want to make sure that everything you send out conforms to your mission and your brand. So if it's been a while since you've written to them, acknowledge that. If you recently wrote to them, share that as well. Tell them about where your staff is, what they're doing, how your programs have changed. Thank them, thank them, thank them, and vary it. Board members, volunteers, new staff members, your development staff. There's any number of people who can talk about the work you're doing and how it's impacting them. All right. So our board members, this is a really important part of our efforts. These are people who are hand in hand with us and hopefully are working very closely with us. I want to acknowledge, there are a number of different types of boards, and I think this is a moment where we really have a chance to engage our boards. So if they've been engaged, this is a way we really need them to step up their efforts and work closely with us and our teams. If you have a board that didn't feel as engaged, this is a chance for them to increase their engagement, and frankly, it's very important that they do. A number of us are facing pretty critical decisions, as we saw earlier, event revenue that may have changed, our goals are changing, strategic plans might need to be shifted, staffing. There's a lot of really difficult questions out there, and encouraging your board that this is their duty in this moment is something that I think will benefit us in the long term. So here, just wanted to share some tips about what can board members do, again, because we're all stretched thin. So if you have 15 minutes, ask them to share anything from your social media properties, whether that's Twitter or Facebook. It's really important for them to be messengers of the work that you're doing. If they have 30 minutes, find an individual that they can introduce to the executive director. This is still a time where we can connect with one another and engage, and your connections are really valuable to them. So as a reminder that there are many, many things that they can do at this time. And if they have an hour, just make sure that they have any information about your program that they can share with others, and taking the time to talk them through those so they understand what are the programs and what are you are serving in the moment. So overall, just amplifying content is really important at a time where we can't be together in person. So digging deep on the role. So I want to focus first on their governance role. The board, again, has a legal duty and responsibility and should be working really closely with leadership at the organizations, because any decisions made in these times will certainly affect the organization overall. And we're looking at making sure they're monitoring the finances and the programs so that they're protecting against risks. They're looking at any events that might be considered disruptors. Are you still able to do the work you're doing? If not, what are some of the barriers? Is it equipment? Is it technology? Is it training? Do you necessitate HR support? Again, financial accounting support. These are things they should be looking at and responding to. Always ensuring that any program you do is in alignment with your mission and vision. And reviewing decision-making authority, because this is a health crisis. What is the plan of action for if any staff member becomes ill or has to care for someone else? It's an important part of the work that a board does. And of course, the audit. If we haven't already done our audits, because of the timing of when this happened in Q1, audit season is perpetual, and we want to make sure that the board is supporting and advising on any internal controls. And again, your audit committee of your board is communicating regularly with your accountant.
Heidi, if I could just add something there with regards to the audit. Just wanted to share with everyone, obviously as a result of this pandemic, a lot of organizations have been really, really focused on having a business continuity and disaster recovery plan. Obviously, that is necessary to help the organization to determine the best course of action to allow them to continue after, obviously, again, this pandemic, which was an unforeseen event. And one of the things that, I've had conversations with some of my clients about is to ensure, certain aspects of this business continuity plan is included. Things such as listing essential tasks necessary to keep the operations going, analysis of organizational threats, instructions on where employees can go to find information, how the plan can be tested and updated, things like this. And obviously, last but not least, certainly, is to understand any type of regulatory and or reporting compliance requirements are key. So again, and taking a look at this particular slide, that's the thing that jumped out at me. So just wanted to share.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I know we have a lot on our plates, but I think again, referring to the duty of care, the documentation is incredibly important. And as possible, and I know we've all shifted from working in offices to working remotely, trying to use electronic resources. So if you have, we're thinking of shifting to electronic record keeping, this is a perfect time to have to do it. Thinking about how you're doing your check processing, again, your agreements, make sure everything's in alignment. And if you're looking for support or advice or guidance, groups like GRF, this is exactly that time to check in with them and make sure that at this point, that you're doing those things. For the foreseeable future, how we do our work will evolve. So ensuring that you implement those processes. And ultimately, that is a board duty, making sure everything in terms of the finances and record keeping are legal and are in order. So appreciate that highlight.
Yep, absolutely. It's all about enhancing operational resilience of the organization.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's so great to have partners in this because we know everyone's experiencing the same shifts. And on the positive side, because we need some encouragement, if these were plans that your organization had already, this is the time to fulfill them. And if you were already doing it, it shows that you're demonstrating that sort of foresight of how do we make sure that people can access the information they need, regardless of location. It's not either in one person's head or in one person's office, that there's a duty of care with these. So I want to talk a little bit now about the board's duty of fundraising. We talked earlier about fundraising usually from the staff level, but we also want to make sure that the board members engage in this area. And what we found is that the more engaged the board members are, certainly the more engaged our donors will be. So making sure you have a plan that clarifies what the organization's doing. One of the questions sometimes board members have is, our organization doesn't have a direct result or impact to COVID. How do we talk about what we're doing? So I think what you want to focus in on is, what are you doing? And part of that is, what are the activities that are either ephemeral or that really help the space? Just because we're in the midst of a pandemic doesn't mean that certain things stop. So the efforts that you have not only are important today, they'll be important tomorrow. And if your board understands that, they can help you with fundraising. These are your partners. So we want to make sure that they're in sync with everything that you're doing. If they can host events, that would be a wonderful way for them to support your organization. Making sure that any financial planning that you're doing on the fundraising side is in sync with them and highlighting for them urgent needs. Again, this can be equipment, this can be supplies. We're seeing a lot of software needs, things like that. Sharing them, having them share with you what they're learning. Board members are often in different spaces than we are, and they can be hearing different things, whether it's from the legal community, the financial community, other community service organizations. What are they learning and hearing, especially from different parts of the country or in your communities? It's valuable learning that they can share. And again, talking with other partner organizations. One thing that we are hearing is that organizations are suffering. So this may be a time to begin to talk about a merger conversation or combining programming, working jointly. This is not the time to think, let's not talk to people. This is the time to double down on engagement overall. They can also be your messengers to your donors and to your staff. It's wonderful if a board member, especially a board chair, can send a message to all staff about the value that the staff is bringing and their programs are bringing. Just ensure that any messages that go out are consistent, and that if they are sharing messages, that they're sharing them repeatedly. We don't want to hear these things once and never hear that again from a board member. That wouldn't help us. So again, our communication themes, it's really useful just to have these tips always in mind. Be patient, be empathetic, understand that you're part of a community, understand that because this is a health crisis, people can be individually impacted in ways that are very unsettling. It could impact their finances. And when you're asking for support, always lead with empathy, but be honest about your needs. It's important to continue fundraising at this time.
We have now come to our final polling question. Has your organization received unsolicited donations, including in-kind support, i.e. services? A, yes. B, no. C, unsure. Please take a moment now to answer. While participants are submitting their answers, I'll provide the final CPE word. The final CPE word is crisis. If you want to receive CPE credit, please jot this word down because you will need it for the survey following the webinar. Again, the final CPE word is crisis, C-R-I-S-I-S. All right, it looks the majority of the respondents have said yes, they have received unsolicited donations. That's great.
That is great news. So again, it shows that people are interested in engaging and that they're willing to support the work that we're doing. Please keep this in mind as you go through developing your strategies. And in the next part, I want to take us through some examples, and feel free to think about how you might be able to apply these in this moment. And I want to share that these were actually taken from either organizations that I support or are deeply connected to. And this is just a sampling. There's dozens and dozens out there, but showcasing some of the work that our partners are doing. So this one I really like because it kind of hits all the notes we've talked about. Mary Center is a nonprofit organization based in Washington, D.C. It works very closely and deeply with the community in which their physical location is located. So this is a little bit dated. It's a few weeks old, but it's sharing information about the number of cases. So again, this is a trusted partner. This is a resource. This is a frontline organization. I'm getting trusted information from them. They're encouraging us to participate on Giving Tuesday. There's an opportunity for me to engage. There's an opportunity for me to give and amplify this message. And if you look towards the bottom, it shares that they have an engagement with a corporate partner. Washington Gas has agreed to match their donations. So this is hitting all the notes. And I know not all of us have the opportunity to have each of these, but you can demonstrate how it's important to reaffirm what is your need in the moment and what can people do to help or engage. And this hits all those notes. The next example, I think, is a good one because it shows what we can do with events. Alliance for Justice, hopefully a lot of you are familiar with them from their advocacy work and training people on how we can speak up. But they're holding a series of conversations with leaders in the legal space and activists. And these are conversations that are held on a weekly basis. And this is something that they wouldn't otherwise be able to do, and bringing together a number of different people from across the country. And they don't need to be in an office, and they don't need to be physically together. And this topic can change each time. So again, opportunity to engage, it's consistent, and it's of the moment. And it's free. There's no charge for this. Our next example, I had to put in a Young Invincibles example. I'd be remiss about not promoting my organization if I said throughout this thing we have to share what we're doing. So here's what we're doing. At the top, you can't see it, but there's a video of our executive director working from home, and I particularly love it because it's so authentic. During the video, at one point, one of her children just ran through the room where she was filming, and she was able to pivot and say, like, this is the reality we're all living in the moment. The email also highlighted what is our response and acknowledged that we're not a frontline organization, but reaffirmed what it was we were doing in the moment. And another great example from our partners at Feeding America. Feeding America had just had, right before this snapshot was taken, very successful event. Some people may have participated in it, watching a reboot of the television show Parks and Recreation as a fundraising effort. So right after that, they're asking people to do something else, which is counterintuitive, but is actually what's most successful. People who've engaged are more willing to engage right afterwards. So if they've donated, you can ask them to engage in another way, whether it's signing a petition or helping to promote an event, and vice versa. This is a great example of that, and this is from their Twitter feed. And again, we said that we would share some resources. There's many, many, but these are just some of the ones that I find useful and accurate and trustworthy. Chronicle of Philanthropy, and I included their social media handles. Nonprofit Times, Nonprofit Quarterly, Foundation Center, which has shifted branding to Candid, but can still be found at FDN Center, and Inside Philanthropy. These resources are also aiming to provide information about COVID-related information at no cost. The Foundation Center continues to provide trainings and resources for our sector as well. And as always, please talk with your teams, talk with your external partners, and make sure you're in sync with each and every one of them.
All right. Thank you so much, Heidi. Before we wrap up today, I want to answer a few of the questions submitted by our online participants. I have one here. There are many local nonprofits that have a similar mission. How can you distinguish yourself in this moment?
Yeah, it's a great question and very difficult. When I think of this, I often think of the performing arts organizations. So I think a combination of advice would be reflect back on what your organization has done that has been unique. Was it developing a program or establishing a program that didn't exist? Was it how you serve your community in a specific way? And also reach out to those partners. You know, we found that in times of crisis afterwards, nonprofits sometimes do come together and join. So this might be a good time to start that conversation if you think that that would be of value and to demonstrate that you're not duplicating efforts. You can also affirm those partnerships and talk about how you are working together. So when they support you, they're actually supporting a number of other organizations.
Okay, thank you, Heidi. It looks like we have time for just one more question. And we have one here. We are likely to have to cancel an event and are unable to transition to a virtual event, but we'd already received some funds. What might we tell our donors? We could use that funding.
Yes, well, good to hear. We all could use the funding. I think it's exactly as we highlighted earlier. Be honest. This is a time to really share with your donors what you're seeing. As an example, again, from my work experience, I've begun to share to some great detail with funders how we've gone to remote. You know, we've said things like, well, we're remote now. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean, you know, we don't have backup equipment? Does it mean we had to ship out hotspots to our colleagues in places that are a bit more remote or didn't have internet access at home? Be frank about your needs and talk about how, as much fun or as inspiring as the event is, the real purpose was to ensure that the organization thrives. And this is a time not to push back, but to actually step in more deeply and engage. I know for many of us, one of the ways events helps us is it provides us with unrestricted funding. Donors come and it doesn't always go to a specific effort. And the people and the projects that funding supports, that could be a newsletter, it could be your technology, it could be stipends for people who engage in your programs to make sure they're compensated. Be explicit about what those funds would have been used for, and it can help donors to transition their gift, but always be mindful of the fact that, you know, this is a tough time for all of us, so as best they can support. Another tip is maybe have a phone call. If your executive director, president, or someone on your development team or a volunteer can contact them. Like let's say somebody came to an event with someone every year and one person always gave. without sharing personal information to say, you know, Trevor, I know you come every year, and every year you bring Nathan, and we'd love to have Nathan come again. You know, can you reach out to him on our behalf, or can I share with him that you were planning to come to, something like that. So that way people feel a little bit more deeply connected, but just always be sensitive that our financial situations are precarious.
Absolutely. That's a great answer. Thank you, Heidi. So it looks like we're just about out of time. So in conclusion, I just want to point out, if you have any additional questions after today's program, please reach out to us. Our contact information appears here. With that, we would like to thank everyone attending today's webinar. We encourage you to follow us on social media at GRF CPAs and visit our website at www.grfcpa.com for upcoming events and alerts. Again, please remember to complete the email survey that follows if you want to earn CPE credit for attending today's webinar. Thank you again, and have a great day.